Welcome to From Isolation to Conversation. This three-part series includes the second part, which we are recording today, called Cataloging the Community. I'm Sharon Morris, the Public Library Leadership Consultant for the Colorado State Library, Colorado Department of Education. And I'm joined by my colleague, Kieran Hickson, who is the Rural and Small Library Consultant. Our work involves supporting libraries with strategic initiatives that strengthen both the libraries and their communities. And so today, to this end, we are supporting Colorado Public Library directors as they bring you this series of hands-on workshops. So again, this is the second in a three-part series. We recorded the first section on planning, and this will be the discussion of all the logistics around the interviewing. Note that we will have a third session on March 9th, which we'll talk about in a minute. First, I'd like to introduce our presenters in alphabetical order. Jamie LaRue is the director of the Garfield County Public Library District in Rifle. Brenda Marshall is the Pine River Library District Director in Bayfield in southwest Colorado. And Nancy Trimm is the director of the Bemis Public Library in Littleton. So take it away, Jamie.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Sharon, and welcome back, everybody. I thought I would start with just what our process was. This is kind of the big picture of everything we'll be doing. And again, to race through this, step one is to think about who are the people who are influencers in your community, come with that list, then interview them, not in the library, but in their own space. The third step is to document and analyze all those interviews, mine them for themes. The next step is to debrief all the people you interviewed, invite them back to the library to hear what they told us, pick a project or initiatives, recommend them to the board, do them, and then tell everybody about them. So last time we not only talked about that model, we kind of focused a little bit on how do you pitch it to your stakeholders. That would be the board, the staff, and the community. And we kind of brainstormed some barriers and strategies. We left with the idea that you should set up your team, who are the ones who will be going out into the community to conduct the interviews and make sense of them. We talked about a very brief staff exercise that you can do to get people comfortable with this notion about doing this community interview, kind of moving from talking to people to beginning to catalog the community. And we talked about reviewing some of the questions for the community. Probably not a bad place to stop to say, did anybody have, with in the week or so since we did our last one, any issues that you want to talk about in chat? Anything you want us to be aware of? Issues or problems with any of the homework? And I'll just kind of let that run for a bit and jump on to the next one. So again, the homework was introduce the topic to the board and staff, get some kind of preliminary buy-in, do that brainstorming of the movers and shakers with the staff and the board, set up your team, and conduct that staff interview exercise. Okay, so now we're jumping into what that interview itself looks like. And what I'll be doing as I go through some of these ideas, I'll always stop and kind of ask our panelists to weigh in on these. So Sharon had mentioned at the beginning that we've created some Google tools for you. So the tools that you will need is to have kind of maintain a spreadsheet or a chart of who it is that you're going to be interviewing. And so I'll just kind of pull this up on the screen so that you can see it. This is a very simple one. And the idea is that in the first column, you have the name of the person you're going to talk to. B column is what is the way that you will be contacting them. You do reach out by email, or reach out by telephone, could be an address. What category do they fall into? And the idea is that we had brainstormed about 7 different categories just to jog our minds about who we could be talking to in the community, just so we don't leave out some major sector. And then D column is about what date did you contact them to set up the interview? Did you send in the E column a reminder that you're coming? What date is the interview going to be on? Where is it going to be? Place and time. Has it been entered in the sense of have you typed the information from a form or into a form to feed a spreadsheet? Which staff is responsible for that contact? And after it's all over, did you send them a thank you note of some kind? And did you invite them to the debrief? And again, Sharon will talk about making this spreadsheet available to everybody, but it's just a very easy way to stay on top of who you're talking to and why. And I think Brenda, you had said that, you had used this interview as kind of your management tool. So you would go back between sessions to say, how many people do we have? Does it look like we're making progress? Does it look like we've missed any of the categories? Anything else that either you or Nancy would you'd like to say about just the spreadsheet?
Yeah, we used it definitely as a way to, particularly to make sure people weren't missing. So we looked through it pretty carefully. And for example, one of my board members pointed out to me that I didn't have anybody on there under the age of 40 at one point. And so, that was great. And then we also looked to make sure that we had political diversity and kind of racial diversity and a good cross section of our community. And I actually added a column at one point for our board so that they could look at it and then they could highlight or put a check mark next to people that they felt really were super important. So we definitely went backwards and forwards in and out of our spreadsheet a lot during the process.
Okay. And Nancy, any comments? I feel like this is kind of the key management tool for managing the process.
Yeah, it was for us. And we shared this with all of the staff members who were part of the interview team. That was a total of 16 for us, just so that everyone could keep track of where we were in the interview process. The only other thing I would add is that we added an additional tab to this spreadsheet for those names that were referred to us during our interviews. That last question is, who else should we talk to? And so if we got names based on the responses, we added an additional tab so we could keep track of those names in the hopes that we would have the opportunity to also reach out to them.
Okay, that's great. Okay, so the idea is that, again, you heard both from Nancy and from Brenda. You go through to review the potential gaps in the categories and make sure that you haven't dropped anybody off and maintaining this relationship. And then the next one is this idea about the Google form. And this has been done in a couple of different ways. It can be done online so that, and again, just to remind everybody, when you send out people to do the interviews, it's typically groups of two. One is your lead interviewer, the one probing and asking the questions, and then someone else is recording things. It probably is easiest to say if you've got someone with the laptop, it's usually faster to keep up with everything just by typing right into the form. But if you can't do that, or you are uncomfortable with that, it's easy enough to just print out the form, fill it in, and type it in later. But again, what you see here is that it's like it captures the email of the person who fills out the form. You put down the date, you put down the name, you put down the contact information, put down the background information. The first interview question is, how did you get here? This is very much the relationship building question. Personal passion or drivers, again, linking to that bond between library staff and interviewee and getting them excited about the thing that you want to talk to them about in the first place. Then you move into the heart of it. As you think about your constituents, what are the issues that most matter to them over the 18 to 24 months? What are their aspirations? What are your aspirations for the community, and who else should we talk to? And so the idea is right now, there are no responses to this. But once the responses start coming in and you'll go to this form, then you go over and you click on this create spreadsheet, and it will populate the spreadsheet with all of those data elements in that same order. So that becomes the master record of all the information that you're receiving. Okay. Any comments about that, Nancy or Brenda? Fairly straightforward.
Just one small comment is that we did, I know we spoke about this last time, but we ended up adding another catch-all question at the end, which was just simply, do you have anything else you'd like to tell us? So we did doctor our form and our spreadsheet, automatically populated. So again, it's nice that we have this great framework, but we do have the option to kind of tweak it or make it appropriate for your community or your interviewing style or what have you.
Absolutely. And editing these forms in Google is very, very easy. So not hard to change things. Okay. So that's that. So now let's talk about what it looks like to manage the overall interview process. These are the basic steps. You set up the interview, and I'll be talking in a moment about what kind of script you might use when you make that initial contact. We'll talk about sending the call or an email, a reminder that the interview is coming. You show up to conduct the interview. Please be prompt. Get right to it when you show up. And then the follow-up is, thank you, here's the reminder of the debrief. And then, of course, remember to enter the data at the end. So setting up the interview, and I presented this when I was doing this as a consultant to all the libraries that I worked with. But I'll ask Nancy and Brenda to address this. I don't think anybody has to use this particular script. It's just overcomes that a bit of discomfort when you're making a cold call to someone who may have influence in the community that you haven't spoken to before. So it's like you phone, mail, or email them, and you say something like, we're reaching out to you because you've been identified as the community leader. We want your insights and wisdom. And I say wisdom, sometimes people think I'm joking about this, but generally speaking, the people that you say it to do feel honored to be asked. And I honestly believe that what we're seeking is wisdom. The philosophy behind reaching out to movers and shakers in the community is that they talk to a lot of people. Human beings make meaning. And the way we make meaning is we sift through all of these conversations for patterns. Those patterns are what we call wisdom. So then you tell people, number 3, we have 5 or 6 questions. It'll take about an hour to answer this. And we remind them we'll be asking about your insights about the community concerns. And number 5 is very important. We want to meet at your place of business or your choice for a meeting space. Again, we'll talk more about this later, but what we're trying to get these folks to talk about is their insights about the community. We're not asking them to talk about the library. We're not asking them to be overawed by our beautiful buildings when they come in. We want them to be comfortable in their own spaces as they talk about the issues that matter to them. And then we remind them, number 6 is we're presenting the issues, the results back to the community. And then you go back and update that first spreadsheet we talked about, the interviewee. Any comments or questions about that? Nancy, Brenda?
Yeah, I'll just add, we pretty much followed the script, but our staff was free to personalize it to their communication styles. I will say that we gave our staff latitude to take people out for coffee and invited a lot of our interviewees to local coffee shops in the area, which really was a nice way to set up a casual and more sort of familiar interview. So it was a good environment conducive to getting information.
Okay, and Brenda, where did you wind up holding your interviews?
We did most of ours out in the community, which was cool for me because I got to go into some places I'd not actually been to, so that was kind of fun. And I met a few people, like Nancy said, at coffee or lunch or what have you, and some people in their homes. Really interesting. And then we did do a couple on Zoom for people for whatever reason where that was more convenient. One tiny thing on here is that I know you say you update the interview spreadsheet, but we use the form to type the information, and that populated the spreadsheet. So you kind of have 2 ways of going in. You can just answer your own questions, in the form, and it populates, or you can do it in there. But yeah, the same as you said, we didn't have anybody who was, it was much more comfortable than I imagined, because we are reaching out for their input. And so before we started, I thought I might feel uncomfortable or it might be nerve-wracking, but it really wasn't. People were happy to talk about themselves and their own perspective.
Okay, great. So then the next one is, and I'll kind of look over here on the chat window. Do you have other ideas for a community question? Again, I really like Brenda's, just the notion, in case we didn't ask you something, if you've been saving up something you wanted to tell us, here's your chance to do it. But anybody else that is thinking about a question they wanted to slide in, I would encourage you to pitch it over in the chat window now, and we'll figure out if we either agree with you or we should talk you out of it. And so Nancy, I can't remember, did you add anything new? And then Sharon, I'm sorry, you just unmuted. You may have a comment there too.
I just want to make a note that Janet asked about something that we'll circle back to and keep you going on this track for a few minutes.
Okay. And Lisa put out, is there a question that I should have asked but haven't? That's fine. And was comment here for Brenda's small library. Did you have any trouble getting staff to help, or staff to be pretty introverted? How many members of teams did you have? So you just want to talk about your staffing for the interview team?
Yeah, Janet, so I think we spoke about this a little bit last time, that we kind of had a lot of leeway in what we did, but I did most of the interviews myself actually, because I wanted to do that as a new director and to get to meet everybody. But I did always have, or almost always have, somebody with me to take notes. So yeah, we kind of did it ourselves. So I think again, you have a lot of leeway. If you have people that are really not comfortable, it might be a good time to encourage them to into a different place, and they might just need a little confidence building, or it might be that they're not a good fit for that question, for that role. Yeah.
Nancy, how about you? I had the sense that it was more about trying to rein in your staff. Everybody wanted to go, but
Yeah, we did. I mean, we deliberately paired people together that we thought would complement one another. Maybe one person was a little more extroverted and more comfortable with community conversations, maybe had some programming experience that had given them some public speaking confidence. So we intentionally paired people together so that they could, their skills would complement each other. And it was a good opportunity for staff growth and development, I'll say. So I would just advise to be real intentional about pairings. And I think pairings do build confidence. If you're able to spare the staff to do that, I would recommend it.
and I think it's also the case, as Brenda had mentioned, that I found that even the ones who went off kind of nervous, thinking that they were like a sales call or something, when you realize the job is just to ask questions and listen, they all came back kind of energized by it. They found it was really fascinating, not stressful, but interesting. Okay, so again, I want to remind everybody here is that you are listening and probing. It is not your job to talk. I think I mentioned last time that when I was first kind of pitching this with one of my libraries, the PR person said, "Oh, this is great. I've got a whole packet I've prepared for all these people and I'm pushing all these programs." And it's like, no, don't do that. Don't confuse this with a marketing job. This is a listening tour. It's okay to bring your business cards and hand those out, but don't bring flyers, don't bring swag. This is just a conversation. You're trying to keep the focus on the person. When I was asking about what additional questions, the main thing I want to do is to ward you away from asking about the library. Do not say, do you have any ideas about what the library can do for you? As I point out here, that's our job, and we're trying to gather as much information as possible about community needs to figure out how we should respond to them. When we talk to these people that are movers and shakers, they are experts. They're talking about things that they have expertise about. If they're talking about the library, they don't. That's our expertise. So keep the focus on them. And I'll just observe in both in number 3 here is that you will very quickly see in the process of listening to them, you'll think about 4 or 5 ways that we could immediately step in and help them. Don't do that either when you're talking to them. Don't promise that you're going to be able to satisfy things. You are still just gathering information. We're not trying to solve everybody's problems, trying to find a place where we can really make a difference. Anything to add there, Nancy or Brenda, about these points?
Yeah, I have a little bit to add. One was that I found out that some people, when they knew I was coming, kind of did their homework. And so as soon as I walked in, they had lots to tell me about the library. And so a couple of suggestions about that. One was when I was setting up the interview, I kind of gave them a preview of what was going to happen. And I would say when I was setting it up, we're coming out to visit with you. We'd love to ask you these questions about our community and about what's going on in Bayfield. So, and I said, and then when I started the interview, I would say, it might seem counterintuitive, but we're asking you these general questions about the community. And then I kind of explained the system to them a little bit. We're going to use those questions to help highlight us in our decision making moving forward. And then, but some people still said, I really think you should be offering da-di-da, or what have you. And from my perspective, I was happy, I didn't want to embarrass them or shut them down. So I would listen and say thank you, and I so appreciate your input. And then back to the questions, then I would bring them back and refocus. But I didn't I did spend some time just being quiet and listening, even if they were going down a rabbit hole that I wasn't actually setting out to find out about.
And I will say, like, this question has come up, and I see that Stephanie asked this one again. You know what the questions are. Should you send them out ahead of time? And my feeling about this one is that it really just depends. If they ask for them, go ahead. There's nothing secret about it. Some people are just going to give you more answers if they've had a chance to think about them. But generally speaking, I found that you didn't have to send it out ahead of time. It's the sort of things that it kind of flows in a fairly organic fashion. But I'm curious, Brenda, Nancy, how often did you actually provide the answers ahead of time or provide the questions?
Yeah, we just provided the questions if they asked. I found that, sometimes people who are particularly busy wanted the questions ahead of time so they could prepare and know what they were getting into. So we were happy to do that. But I would say the majority of people didn't ask for that.
Okay, that would be my experience as well.
Yeah, and
Okay,
that
so
was
now-
our experience too.
Okay. So just some kind of basic interview tips, and I'll kind of give you my take on this one. I hear it from people who've done it more recently. So the idea is when you walk in, you thank them, you showed up on time, you introduce yourself, give them your cards, and then get right to it. This is not like a big, chat them up first. The questions kind of themselves warm up the person that you're talking to. So you follow the form, either printed or online. And then during the conversation, it's just like any other reference interview, you ask follow-up questions. So if you say, as you think about your constituents, what are they talking about? You may all of a sudden notice that they're talking about a couple of different kinds of constituents. So stop and sort that out. Who exactly do you mean? What do you know about them? You can say, can you expand on this, or can you clarify? And you might also ask, sometimes this pops up, if an issue keeps coming up over and over, you might say, is anyone else working on these issues with you? And just kind of back to Nancy and Brenda, any other examples that you would say that you found particularly useful as follow-up questions or tips during the interview?
My one tip is I think it's natural for the movers and shakers who regularly interact with the library to want to talk about the library and either want to give you feedback or suggestions. So I think be prepared for that. And just also be prepared to redirect them back to the questions that you have at hand, thank them for their feedback. Make a note of their suggestion if they have one, but continually redirect them back to your original community focus questions.
Yeah. Anything else, Brenda, that you would add?
No, I think what's really nice about it is you can just let it roll. Really, I think really if you're in conversation with anybody, you know how to do that. Really, how to have a conversation, listen and respond, and it's pretty comfortable. I think that experience like that. No, I think they're great questions.
Okay, not seeing anything coming in on chat, so I'll move on to the next one. I want to highlight my favorite moment in these conversations. Didn't happen all the time, but it happened often enough that I noticed it. And that said, halfway through the conversation, somebody looks at you and they say, who are you again? And they say, I'm with the library. And they say, and why are you here? And these two statements, it's like we're trying to understand the environment in which we operate. That's just due diligence. But the second one is when you say we're looking for places where we can add value. This is a moment of deep reframing in the mind of the person you're talking to. Often movers and shakers are used to public entities who come up and bang the table and say, we're really important, give us money. But they're surprised when somebody shows up and they say, I'm really listening to the issues that you're talking about, and I'm looking for a way that the library might help. Suddenly they see the library as a solution to their problem. And that's a very new kind of spin on advocacy. It's not promotion of services. It's about promotion of the library as a social asset to solve other people's problems. I think this is one of the deepest advantages of this whole approach. Nancy, Brenda, anything that you'll add there, or where you got questions, meta questions about why you were doing it or how you needed to respond? Not so much? Okay, we will go on. So then, so you've got the data, you've got all these notes. Best is to do it online, as I mentioned, or within a day or so of the interview, just because you go back to the office, you forget what you were working on, you forget the nuances of that cryptic scribble that you made. In both cases, whether you do it right away or within 24 hours or so, do have the partner review. And Brenda, you mentioned something about this last time, and I'd like to come back to that about why you want a partner to review. And then as you're kind of reviewing and typing these things in, begin to start highlighting or bolding keywords. For instance, if you notice after 2-3 interviews, homelessness keeps coming up and you start to input the next one, you may want to highlight or bold that when you're working with the spreadsheet. And then as has already been mentioned, if someone says, who else should we talk to? Add that to the interview spreadsheet, either to the bottom of the list you already started, or as Nancy said, with the new tab. Okay, any comments, questions about this? And Brenda, again, I'd want to give you a chance to underscore the advantage of having 2 people look at the reports.
Yeah, I really did love doing the interviews with the second person, because often we travel together or whatever, or drive home or walk home or whatever. And several times we had heard different things that were said. You know, we all have that confirmation bias. So I would hear the things that spoke to me or jumped out at me or shocked me or whatever. And then my colleague Lydia would say, oh yeah, but he said blah, 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 something else. And so it was really useful having 2 people. And yeah, I have trouble remembering a lot of information anyway. So it's kind of like when you go to the doctor and you come out and you can't remember all the things they said. And it's great to just have a second person to bounce that off of and to look at. Yeah.
And then, so you mentioned this, the importance of kind of pairing people up. Did you have the pairs switch so that one would interview one times and record the next, or they were just more comfortable in one role or the other?
Yeah, you know, they did end up switching off once they had gotten the experience of the first interview out of the way. That really was a confidence builder. So I believe in every instance, our teams did switch up and take turns being the interviewer and the note taker.
Okay, that's good. And I connect to this, I think that this really is a staff development tool as well as, learning about the community.
And I was just going to jump in and just say one of the things that is important, I think, is to just write down exactly what they said. Sometimes we have a tendency to try to shorthand or interpret in the moment what we think they mean. So I think it's good to just have the recorder write down exactly what they said and then do the interpretation later. So there's the collection part where it's just what they said, and then later the analysis.
That's really good. I agree with that because it also makes it much simpler to record. If I see somebody trying to summarize or figure out or rephrase, they kind of interrupt the interview to go back and clarify. Just write down what they say and you can make sense of it later. I agree. Okay, so on to the next. So the idea about when I was doing this as a consultant, I would say to folks like Nancy and Brenda, I'll check in with you. Let's just book another meeting in a week or two. And it might be a 5-minute to 15-minute, very rarely took very long. And I would just say things like, how long are the interviews actually taking? Most of them still manage to come in at about an hour. I would say, do you feel like things are coming together really quickly? Do we need more people with different perspectives? Did you learn anything from interview tips in this process? And are you starting to see some of these emerging themes? And the advantage of doing that is like it just makes you more alert when you go into the next interview. You start to notice those things as you're typing them in the first place. And then it's like any other issues or concerns. But I found that truly once a week, 5 minutes was kind of enough to stay on top of it. But Nancy and Brenda, what did you have to do to manage your folks in-house?
Yeah, I did make it a point to check in with the groups when they would return from the interviews, since on the spreadsheet I knew when they were meeting. So since I was facilitating the whole process, I made sure that I just connected with them and was keeping track. And then since everybody was Everybody had access to the responses. They could view those as they came in. But formally, we met every 2 weeks. And as we mentioned at the first webinar, our process went pretty quickly, mainly because we were still partially closed for COVID. So we had 2 big group meetings to share stories and experiences as a whole team.
In fact, if I can follow up with that one, Nancy, is like, so how did your team change over time as they got more experience? Did you notice any differences in the way they were talking about the interviews or the library?
Well, the funny thing is they all wanted to do more interviews. They really loved the process. So, you know, we ended up doing more than we had originally thought we would because of that, and because of the enthusiasm around it.
Okay.
You know, and there's just kind of circling back, there's a question in the chat area for both Nancy and Brenda, and of course, Jamie, as you as well. Would it be helpful to, before asking the interview questions, to say something to the effect that you aren't looking for library specific ideas, but you're looking more up, to find out issues concerning the community at large?
Yeah, and I think that's something both Nancy and Brenda, you know, sometimes you just have to kind of gently steer them back. There's nothing about the questions that says, I'm looking for you to tell me about the library. But sometimes people just volunteer that, and that's what they think you want. And I think just gently pushing them back to say, oh, you know, thank you so much. We're still just learning at this point, but we're trying to understand what people in our community have learned about the community. So just keep reframing it and pushing it back.
And we definitely did include that sort of statement in our original invitation. Not everybody heard that, I don't think, but I definitely did say, you know, right in the very introduction, when we were reaching out saying, please, can we interview you? I said this, you know, this is what we'll be asking you about generally. But so we did try to preempt that a little bit. And I have to say as well, I heard some great stuff about the library, and that was part of me getting to know people, was hearing those things. But then it's just sort of trying to educate people as you go along about what you're actually looking for. And then in your question about project management, Jamie, I think I mentioned this last time, but we obviously didn't do great in our timekeeping with that, because in contrast to Nancy, it took us a full year to do our process. And so often our review time for me tended to be when we were coming up to a board meeting and I was feeding back to the board every month, which was sort of a natural time to say, okay, how far have we got? What are we doing? Where are we heading? And how is it working out? So yeah, I did it not as efficiently for sure. But
well, and then again, as you were going through this, same question to you, did you begin to see differences in the way your staff talked about the interviews or the library? Or did you see that kind of change with your board if you were sharing these ideas with them?
I think everybody, and like I say, only a few of us participated in it. Everybody really enjoyed it and kind of relaxed into it, I think, as it went on. And I don't think we necessarily changed the format very much, or the questions or anything. I think it was just something, you know, initially there was some apprehension, and after the first couple of interviews, there was very little apprehension. You just were, you know, it was just fun. It really was fun.
Okay. Well, and again, the idea about presenting these forms and then this kind of idea for a project management agenda, it's just to give you all the tools to keep it moving. Okay, I do want to give you this warning. If you start off and you're interviewing 35 to 50 movers and shakers, you might become one. The more you learn about all these issues that people are talking about, the more conversant you get with them, and the more you start piecing things together exactly the way that they did. You talk to a lot of people, you begin to see patterns. And so I really believe that one of the things that happens with this process, you start off saying, I'm investigating the environment. But by the time we get to the third webinar, you'll see that what's actually happening here is you're moving from a gatherer of information to a community convener, to a community leader and agenda setter. Okay, we are almost kind of at the end of what we're doing on this one here. Your homework now, because now you've got a little extra time. It's March before we get together. And it looks like these are just 3 things, but this is the heart of it. This is where the work starts. So you will now download or create those interview spreadsheets and forms, and I'll hand this back to Sharon to talk about where to locate these things. You use that interview script to start setting up as many interviews as you can. And then in the 6 weeks between now and the next session, get out there and conduct as many interviews as possible. Again, if you figure it's 1 hour per interview and it's 2 people, that's how you calculate your staff capacity. How many can you fit into those times? And then, so what we'll get into next time is to say, now that you've got all this data, how do we begin to make sense of it? And how does that start to inform our planning and leadership?
Yeah, well, thank you so much to Jamie, Brenda, and Nancy for all of this great information. We put a link into a field guide, and that field guide includes the content for the first 2 sessions, as well as the link to register for the 3rd session. Just a reminder, that field guide will include questions. It will include the link to the form and the spreadsheet that you can copy. You just click on the ... to go in and make a copy of each of those things in order to do them at your library and to share them with everyone in your library. So hopefully you have what you need to get underway with reaching out to people, conducting some interviews before we meet again in March. And these are the contact information, and we've included that in the field guide as well. So hopefully you have everything you need, and feel free to reach out if you need more from us. Thank you all for joining.